Alright, looks like now I'm live. So, welcome to part 3 of John Stoltenberg's On Refusing to Be a Man. This collection of radical feminist articles that are just awful. This section I think is a little bit shorter than the other ones. So, I guess I'll just kind of dive right into it. But this one is specifically about pornography. So he's going to start to get, like Andrea Dworkin. He was part of this radical feminist anti-pornography movement. And it's kind of an interesting section. I feel like a lot of his arguments here, they're very bad, very thin, and a little bit uninteresting. When it gets into the law, that stuff is, I think it's a lot more technical, and I think there's actually kind of a lot there. But I think you'd need a lawyer to, like, really suss out, like, the impact of all of that. Which I'm not, but I'll try my best to because I see problems with it, but obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I could be misinterpreting it, so, you get what you pay for. But, okay, the first essay he has here, there's some rain in the background. If it's really bad, I'll put headphones on, but I don't intend to play any, like, computer audio or anything for this one, so hopefully I don't need it. Yeah, the first one here, basically, it starts off with this selection of, what are they? I think they're from books. Yeah, from like romance novels of just like these like hardcore porn scenes, which is really funny to listen to from a robo voice, which you can see on the BitChute channel. But there's this pattern where basically he'll take like all of the worst porn he possibly can, and then that's all porn, and that defines male sexual identity. So there's no idea of like anything that isn't like hardcore BDSM, no porn that isn't like rape porn, no porn that isn't like bestiality, any semi-normal porn. No, none of that really counts as porn, at least in terms of his like feminist analysis of how things are. But he talks about the forbidden language of sex, and he's saying all of these things that have become normalized in porn used to be considered forbidden, but now it's totally normal, and now the forbidden language of sex is what the feminists want to do, which is to challenge people, to challenge male supremacy in porn. Yeah, and defines the entire thing as like male over female sexual domination. And this is another interesting thing too that you'll get into later, which is that rather than making anything gender neutral, he defines it as being anti-female, like necessarily and essentially, and then argues that anybody who wants to claim victimization for pornography has to package it in the same feminist critique, right? So nobody can be harmed or degraded in porn unless it's the way in which women are. But he kind of elaborates on that more later. There's very little. Like, for example, he says, over the past 10 or 12 years, radical feminists have developed a content analysis of pornography. At the core of that analysis is a new way of looking at pornography as a window into acculturated male sexuality. What it is, what it desires, what it does, and why. The picture pornography exposes is not a pretty one. Pornography reveals in the sexuality of the men for whom it is made an addiction to force and coercion for arousal, eroticized racial hatred, a despisal of the female, a fetishizing of erection and devotion to penetration, an obsession with interpersonal power differentials, an eroticized commitment to violence, and through it all, an ugly striving to assert masculinity over and against women. Basically, there's very little in terms of statistics in this entire section. He just takes the worst of porn he possibly can, and then just psychologizes off of that. He makes like a general argument that there's like a rise in people doing, I guess, more like sadomasochistic sexual things I don't think that this has really played out. Like this hasn't really aged well because, of course, this was the big fear, right? Same thing with the fear of like violent media and violent video games, is that despite there being more of this available and people having more access to it, we've seen like a decline overall in violence in society, right? And if this was like reflecting something essential in male sexuality and something that's just totally normal, and that the things you see in even like the most hardcore pornography, that all of this reflects what people are actually doing all the time, and not just like the most extreme that people are maybe interested in seeing. Um, we would see an acceleration of all these things, right? Like we would see like at a minimum, we'd see all of the porn be much weirder. I think there'd be a much higher proportion of that. It wouldn't be considered the weird porn. That would be like the mainstream of it. And then we'd also see a lot more violence in society overall, and it's been going down. And I'm not really sure how his worldview can be true if that's been the case. A lot of this is very fluffy. Okay, so that's the first bit. I think was there's just not much there. It's so anecdotal and very thin. And then this part, pornography and freedom, he makes a couple of interesting distinctions. He's talking about this idea that people who are pro-sexual liberation, they don't seem to really care about what the actual sex acts are. And there is kind of a funny juxtaposition, right, between this idea of sexual freedom when that kind of sex involves a lot of people like being bound and gagged and things like that. I mean, there's really only two perspectives on it. Either you let adults do what they want to do, or you want the government to go in there and to police everyone's sex lives. I guess we can't force people to not try things or want these things. I mean, it's another interesting comparison between this anti-porn movement and the kind of recent trend towards being anti-pornography in the alt-right. It's never like they can just make the case and say, oh, here's something harmful, here's something that we don't like, and here's why you shouldn't support it or you should consider not doing it. Like Crystal Garcia made that case. Besides that, though, it's always people who want the government to step in and to make a bunch of things illegal. And it's always on behalf of women. It's always because, like, I don't know, like, women can't be adults, and we can't trust that adult women can do anything to take any reasonable measures whatsoever to protect themselves from anything. So, that sounds really cynical, but, I don't know, what other alternative is there? You make the case if you're going to be acting within the scope of voluntarism. Let me see here. The other distinction he makes, though, like besides, I guess, just this kind of ironic juxtaposition of if you promote sexual freedom, then you're also going to promote kinds of sex that depict like a lack of freedom, right? He makes a distinction between sexual freedom and sexual justice. And basically, the sexual justice, it's almost sexual goodness. It's basically the idea that because he thinks everything's socially constructed, right? Which is a really not so subtle way of just sneaking your morals into an ethical argument. It's an argument that if people do things that are immoral, it's going to affect society, and then people in society are going to act unethically. Therefore, I get to force my morals onto you through the government. That's essentially the argument of all of the Abrahamic religions as well as in feminism. And that's why this social constructivist narrative is so dangerous. Because, again, I bring it up very often because it's such a useful distinction. Ethics and morality aren't the same thing. And that means that if you're going to respect people's ethical liberties, you're going to have to respect things that are seen as immoral. There's no other way to go about it unless you want the government to police people on a moral level. And there's essentially no way to stop that. There's no way to set a logical limit there. It's going to be whatever is emotionally convenient in the time, or whatever is socially fashionable, and then we're in just full-blown moral relativism. Let's see. There's more of, again, it's always the worst of porn defines the entire thing. I don't recall any point of this analysis trying to break down, like, by percentage, what kinds of porn are more or less popular, because it seems that would be very important to the argument. I know some people in the anti-pornography crowd have kind of tried to do that, but it never seems to be exhaustive. It just seems to be like, oh, I watched the top 100 porn movies from a list of 200, and I checked the boxes for all these things that were featured at some point in them. It always just seems like a very thin narrative. And it seems to me that that one of the growing kinds of porn with the internet has been amateur porn, which would be porn that's a little bit more realistic, which would indicate kind of a move away from a lot of the kinds of porn that he's criticizing. Let's see. Once sexuality is stuck in male supremacy, all the forms of unjust power at the heart of it become almost physically addictive. All the stuff are primitive fight-or-flight reflexes, a pounding heart, a hard sweat, heaving lungs. These are all things the body does when it is in terror, when it is lashing out in rage. And these are all things it is perfectly capable of doing during sex that are terrifying, and sex that are vengeful. Domination and subordination, the very essence of injustice and unfreedom, have become culturally eroticized. And we are supposed to believe that giving eroticized domination and subordination free expression is the fullest flowering of sexual freedom. So we have two issues with this. I would first of all contest this claim that domination and subordination are the essence of injustice and unfreedom. Because again, it has to do with this Marxist perspective where they think all hierarchy is bad. Hierarchies can be voluntary and can be peaceful and can be very useful. That's not to say domination and subordination are unrelated to injustice and freedom, but to call it the essence of it, I wouldn't just take that for a given. But also what's interesting here is that the comparison of these physiological responses he's making, this would actually suggest that, it would suggest an alternative explanation for why these kinds of more hardcore or violent porn are interesting to some people. But instead, he thinks it's like part of a social conspiracy. So I found that part to be a little interesting. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just kind of reading over some of this because so much of it is just, he just states his conclusions, and there's very little actual buildup of an argument. For example, pornography exploits every experience in people's lives that imprisons sexual feelings, pain, terrorism, punishment, dread, shame, powerlessness, self-hate, and would have you believe that it frees sexual feelings. In fact, the sexual freedom represented by pornography is the freedom of men to act sexually in ways that keep sex a basis for inequality. Like, this claim would require a comprehensive view of all of pornography and a breakdown of the percentages and kinds of it in order to justify this, right? And a lot of the things that he mentions about pornography contradict this, which it gets pointed out a lot more clearly in the last essay here. But you know what I mean? Like you can't just make this as a stative claim about all of porn unless you do a breakdown of like all of it, and that all of these aspects are part of it, and that this is the intention of it, and this is actually what's happening in people. And like the analysis of it just isn't there. He just makes claims like these, and that's why I'm skipping so much of it. The section pornography and homophobia, his argument is that you need to have homophobia in patriarchy because it protects men from violence against other men, and it's an expression of the kind of sexuality that is promoted through patriarchy. He actually argues that without homophobia, a woman would be raped every 3 minutes and a man raped every 3 minutes. So I'm not sure whether a woman raped every 3 minutes, if that was just like the rape stat that was fashionable at the time. It later became 2 minutes, and he's just doubling it, or if it was 2 minutes and then he's like splitting it and adding men to it or something. I don't know, but this is literally the viewpoint. Everything is socially constructed, right? He literally thinks that rather than having an explanation for people's identities in terms of gender, that's based in biology and based in the way that based on the evolutionary psychology basis of things, right? That you have limited eggs and unlimited sperm, and then it leads to a lopsided sexual marketplace value, which women can then leverage in order to gain extra privilege and protection in society, and then causes men to have to basically go out and provide for and to protect all of society, and that this would then lead to this dynamic in sexuality. Or instead of any biological explanation, no, instead he suggests that sexual identities are actually contrary to our nature, and that the power of society is so strong that it creates all of these sexual identities even though it goes against our nature. Not even that it has synergy with human nature, but actually goes against it and is that powerful, and basically originates in a conspiracy of ancient males who wanted to take over women. And then that just carried through and has to have all of this constant work of replicating itself socially over and over and over again. And he thinks that this is true to such an extent that basically the point of homophobia, that is an expression of it, and that but for that you'd have men raped as often as women, by feminist standards, because it actually is the case that men are raped as often as women. Feminists just ignore it. Okay, and then this concept that gay male pornography is it creates basically an alternative to manhood, and he's explaining that that's the appeal of it for gay male pornography. He has like a general conception of like a conspiracy between straight and gay men, and that basically it's all about subjugating women. And it's just insane how much we have to go into that. See, for heterosexual men who don't buy this. Yeah, here's where he kind of summarizes it. He says, for homosexual men who do buy into this, it can become a really important part of one's sexual identity as a gay man. Because if you think the problem facing you is that your masculinity is in doubt because you're queer, then the promise of gay male pornography looks like forgiveness and redemption. Not to mention what it feels like, communion with true virility. And then he has another part here where he goes into basically self-help, where, frankly, I think he's speaking to himself more than anyone else. Because if he's looking at this porn and thinks that this must be the essential male sexual identity, and that he needs to have somebody come and explain to him that something about it might be non-ideal or out of balance, and that it's so important that he has to write an essay about it, I really just think that he has issues with being violent sexually, and he has issues with being addicted to porn. I know that that's just kind of like a sweeping, generalized accusation, but from looking at these essays, it was an impression I got in the first part that that's how it reads to me in the third part. Yeah, and this part is just, it's very flowery. Right? Historically, when people have not had when people have not had justice and when people have not had freedom, they have had only the material reality of injustice and unfreedom. When freedom and justice don't exist, they're but a dream and a vision, an abstract idea longed for. You can't really know what justice would be like or what freedom would feel like. You can only know how it feels not to have them, what it feels like to hope, to imagine, to desire them with a passion. Like, this is just not true. Like, people celebrate the small freedoms that they do have. And I guess maybe this is an important difference between the more left-minded socialist and social constructive kind of narrative, is that they only see what's bad about any situation. Whereas if you're pro-liberty, you notice that there's pockets of freedom here and there. Like, a great way to understand this is that if you ever have somebody give you their version of, like, a Marxist utopia, it's really easy to get them to admit to the ways that you'll be able to recreate capitalism in that system. Like, for example, they'll say, oh no, there's a distinction between personal property and property in general. And, like, you can have your toothbrush is part of your personal property, so we're not going to socialize the toothbrushes. So then I say, like, okay, well, can I have 2 toothbrushes? And then they're like, well, yeah, sure, I don't know why you shouldn't be able to have 2 toothbrushes. And I say, okay, well, can I hoard toothbrushes? Can I have multiple toothbrushes? I'm not stealing them. I'm going to, like, go out into nature and I'm going to make toothbrushes and I'm going to keep a whole bunch of them. I'm going to have all these toothbrushes and then I'm going to create a market of toothbrushes and I'm going to have all these toothbrushes here, right? And then you can recreate capitalism under their stupid rules in every single situation. Or they'll say, oh, we're not going to have any currency, but we're going to have these credits. And I'm like, well, can I save these vouchers? Can I save these credits? Can I do something with them? Can I break them down and use the raw materials for something else? You can always find some, like, even if it seems really sad or weird or pedantic, that's what's going to happen. Capitalism is part of human nature, and it is the fundamental expression of freedom. So it always will get recreated in every single scenario. And that's the way of seeing the world that isn't just this, like, Marxist zero-sum game bullshit. Okay, so this was the most interesting part of it. Confronting pornography as a civil rights issue. Let me check in on the chat really quick. Oh, well, actually, you're sending me messages in Discord. Are you talking about messages from earlier? I need to finish this stream. Okay. So, he talks about a conference on anti-pornography in the 80s. And this was a movement that had, like, him, Andrea Dworkin, Catherine McKinnon, some other names we know. And, interestingly, Linda Lovelace, right, who was the star of Deep Throat. And there's a pretty interesting history behind a lot of that, which is, the movie was, did well commercially, and it's credited for starting, like, this golden era of pornography. But then, like, however many years later, she came out and argued that basically she was coerced into doing the entire thing and that it was part of her abusive relationship with her husband at the time. And there's some supporting evidence that he was abusive, but also, like, none of this came out until she was divorcing him. And in a lot of respects, she was an unreliable source. So, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like it's an accusation so many years after the fact, such that there's very little evidence. She did take a polygraph test, which seemed to suggest that she could be telling the truth. She had some inconsistent statements, but the inconsistency might be consistent with having, like, split multiple personalities from being traumatized. But then it's not clear whether the trauma occurred before or after she met her husband at the time. And then after she remarried, she said that her second husband was horrible too because he drank too much or something stupid. And it's just, it's a lot of he said, she said. But basically, the issue I take with it is that he's almost arguing that because there could have been coercion involved in making the film Deep Throat, that it somehow suggests something about people's sexual identities, but in the movie she's depicted as enjoying it. And in here, they talk about how they don't want depictions of women enjoying things that are, like, degrading or could be painful or harmful. But there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement that if they're depicting the woman as liking it, then it's the rapiness of it is not what's appealing. If the rapiness is what's appealing, then you don't want the woman to appear to be enjoying it. You know what I mean? And that's like one glaring contradiction with this whole thing is that like ultimately what the overwhelming majority of men and what all normal men want is for women to enjoy having sex with them. And this is like an important aspect of every kind of porn, even the kind of porn that he's like showcasing as like the worst of the worst, is that you have this glaring contradiction that the porn is depicting the women wanting it. And this, to me, it seems like a problem for this whole narrative. But anyway, there's the argument that having a porn industry creates a financial incentive for different kinds of coercion and sexual abuse. And there's probably some truth to that. The problem, though, is that any of the problems that he's citing here, if they're criminal, right, if people are being trafficked and coerced and raped and things like that, that's already criminal. And there's already laws against that. So what he wants to do is he wants to basically destroy the porn industry. And the way to do that is to make it a civil rights issue. So there's a point, he argues that he'd be extending claims against pornographers into the civil realm, meaning that any woman harmed by porn, and this means not just a woman who like was in a porn and then comes out and says, I was like damaged in this way, this horrible thing happened, and even if it's not technically criminal, like I can still get damages from it. And it moves the statute of limitations to the last time that it was sold. So even if it was a movie made like however many decades ago, if it was sold yesterday, then that like basically refreshes the statute of limitations. And since it's porn, that means that there's basically no statute of limitations ever again. There's a huge list of stuff that can't be brought up in grounds for dismissing something in pretrial, and it's like an insane list. Let's see, did I skip over that? No, that's at a later point. But also, if like a woman is with her boyfriend and her boyfriend says, "Oh, let's try this thing that I saw in a porn," and they try it and she doesn't like it, then like she can claim that she's being victimized as a class of woman and this porn is responsible, and whoever made the porn can be held responsible for it. Like, that's how crazy this law gets. He tries to package in reassurances like, oh no, it won't get taken that way. Why is everybody freaking out? I just want to help women. And it's like, in the name of wanting to help women, he's basically going to make all porn illegal. it's just like the obvious result of this. Even if the claim seems like it'd likely get thrown out, just the fact that you can threaten to have to force someone into trial, and like in the pre-trial, the defense they're allowed like no evidence. They're not allowed to present a contract that includes any consent. They're not allowed to include anything involving sexual history. Basically anything you'd see in a rape shield law, all of that would go in. And like when you look at that list of things, it's like, well, okay, you're basically canceling all pretrial, and you're going to allow any woman who's harmed by any porn to basically sue like any pornographer. And like, especially now that we have internet pornography, this just seems like it would just make porn unprofitable and just shut the entire thing down. And I think that's his real goal. I think all of this conversation about sexual justice and sexual freedom, and the whole conversation about how porn is inherently dehumanizing and reinforces all these hierarchies, I think it's all just a pretense for just wanting to make all porn illegal. Yeah, this is the part where he mentioned the statute of limitations extending to the last appearance or sale of the film made. But what's interesting about this is, like, he's creating a package deal that includes things that, like, totally make sense that you want to crack down on. Like, obviously, it's not okay for someone to get coerced into pornography, right? but that should already be covered under the criminal statutes, right? So if there's already a crime there, then it's a problem of the police not enforcing that crime. And it's being packaged with literally like things that really aren't related to porn, or they're tangentially related to porn, and allowing people who really had nothing to do with certain situations just like getting dragged into court in a civil rights lawsuit. It's like this is like Me Too on crack. Let's see. The Civil Rights Anti-Pornography Ordinance is written so that a person whose rape is photographed or who is coerced into performing for pornography has the right to file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission or bring a civil suit into court. If they successfully prove their case, they could collect money damages from the whole chain of profit, and that person could also get the pornography made from the coercion off the market if in the locality where the ordinance is in force. Like, if a person is raped or coerced into doing porn, this is a criminal issue. Or this is an issue of people committing crimes. The fact that it's being set up in this way, that's like, oh, well, let's have this alternative path where a human rights commission can help you gank people who sell porn in order to get money because you can just claim that you were coerced even though there's no evidence of it. Like, it seems like there's a major moral hazard there and a major incentive for people, for basically anyone who ever does any porn, to just make up a story. Obviously, they have to prove it, right, in a civil court. I think, though, my understanding is that in a civil court, your burden of proof is either preponderance of the evidence or clear and convincing evidence. So, like, not beyond a reasonable doubt. Let me see. What about porn without women in it? I guess gay porn hurts women too. Yeah, his argument is gay porn hurts women too. It's part of misogyny. So he talks about that later. His argument is if you're not a woman, you can make the same. You can still like get relief under the civil rights ordinance. However, you have to argue that basically the abuse was the same kind of abuse that women experience. And it's such a fascinating form of woman worsting. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. I'm just going to grab my drink. Ugh. So, okay, rather than making a generalized argument about victimization, and just says, okay, so there's ways in which men or women can be exploited or manipulated in porn, it can be anybody making the claim. It can be anybody coming forward with it, but it has to be framed in such a way that it's like, I was abused the way women are abused. And the issue is a lot of what they list here, you can see how there's an argument to be made that men in porn are objectified in that way. And that might be a pedantic thing, a pedantic distinction, but it seems very unnecessary. But again, it's woman worsting, right? It has to be based in this. But then he also extends this. The part of the argument for this being a civil rights issue is that if you are in porn, it hurts your ability to get a job, and then therefore decreases your standing in society, and it makes it less easy for you to engage in society. And if we're going to be in a democracy, we have to not be allowed to look down on people in porn. And that's really the best I can state that argument, that he tries to link it to the economic interests, and he literally uses that example. And like, I don't know, I'm just dumbfounded by that claim. And this is why framing things in terms of civil rights, it was always a bad idea, and the entire approach needs to be just completely fucking abandoned, because this is where it leads. It's a moralist slippery slope. He complains about how his anti-porn movement gets compared to like the purity movements, But it really is the exact same case, and they're both doing it for the same reason, which is to protect women from the consequences of their own actions. Oh, he has this quote in here. Yeah, this Linda Lovelace story, she did a movie where she had sex with a dog a few years before she did Deep Throat, and for a while she just denied it. And she said, like, oh no, I was never in that. But then since Deep Throat got so popular, people found the video, and eventually she was like, okay, yeah, I fucked a dog. And then later after that, she says, oh, but I think the argument was that the second time she was coerced. I'm pretty sure she didn't even argue that the first time she fucked a dog that she was coerced. I think it was only the second time. so, so then it's like, yeah, well, it's like you, like this is an example, right? As they say that you can't bring up somebody's sexual history in order to dismiss anything in pretrial, but like, how would that not be relevant? I mean, it's like, okay, we like you fucked a dog on camera for money, and it, there's a guy who said if she didn't enjoy that, she's like the greatest actress of all time. Which, but then the argument is like, well, you're that she's supposed to act like she's enjoying it. So how do you know? And it's like you don't. You really don't. Like, and this is why maybe don't do porn. Like, maybe tell people it's probably a bad idea to get into porn. But anyway, so Andrea Dworkin's quote regarding this is, if you can coerce someone into fucking a dog, you can coerce them into signing a contract. And that's fair enough. That's a fair enough point. But I don't know. Like, how do you do that? Like, how does this not shut down all contracts? How can I not argue under any situation that's like, oh, the entire my entire consent of any contract regarding anything, even if it's not porn, it was coerced. There was a gun off camera. We recorded me signing the contract, but there was a gun off camera. There can always be a gun off camera. Like, how do we ever definitively prove literally anything if you can always just say, oh, well, there was a secret gun? No, I can't prove it was there. Obviously, they didn't put the gun on camera, right? Like this is really just an obvious slippery slope with absolutely no checks. So basically, his argument can be used to ban anything that harms the ability to hurt one's income. Let's ban homosexuality and being a retard too. Yeah, I don't see why not, right? And it's like, it could even include things that you do, but then maybe you regret doing later. Like, even if it wasn't coerced. He packages things that are coerced with things that aren't coerced, right? And like, to me, it seems like if his interest were in only helping victims of things like sex trafficking, right? You would narrow the scope of things, but instead it's a really, really broad scope. And what it is it's like women who experience regret rape get to pretend that they're like sexually trafficked or forced into prostitution or whatever. And it's again with this concept of like one woman is all women, and it's very I think exploitative and manipulative. You think that if he cared about the people who are the worst victims of pornography, that you'd create something that's incredibly fixed and narrow in its scope so that you're not tying so many things to it that are going to risk it getting shot down. And it's not just the expansion of classes of victims and then classes of people that you're allowed to go after to get money. It's also the fact that it's packaged in with all this radical feminist ideology, which there's no reason for that. There's no reason to put all of that in there, particularly when he's trying to make the argument in terms of civil rights to link it to direct harms and to link it to actual victims. There's no reason for it to be, as he describes it, gender specific but gender inclusive. It's like, why not just make it gender neutral? There's literally no reason to package in your entire ideology. My theory is that he wants enshrined this civil rights argument so that he can use the full force of all of the law in order to, basically they'll never have to make their case again. They get that this case enshrined into law so that now he doesn't have to make the case over and over again, because I think maybe he suspects that it's completely fucking insane. Okay, here was the list I mentioned. This is the list of things that you're not allowed to bring up in pretrial to dismiss anybody's accusation against you if you're somebody who was, I guess, in any way involved in making or distributing porn. Oh, wait. Let me see. Say, proof of one or more of the following facts or conditions shall not, without more, preclude a finding of coercion. That the person is a woman, which again, is he arguing that like someone's gonna say, oh, well, she is a woman, therefore all women want this, or like that's like why is that in it? That's like stupid. That the person is or has been a prostitute, that the person has attained the age of majority, that the person is connected by blood or marriage to anyone involved in or related to the making of the pornography, or that the person previously had or had been thought to have had sexual relations with anyone, including anyone involved in or related to the making of the pornography, or that the person has previously posed for sexually explicit pictures with or for anyone, including anyone involved in the porn. That anyone else, including a spouse or other relative, has given permission on the person's behalf, that the person actually consented to a use of a performance that is then changed into pornography, that the person knew that the purpose of the acts or events in question was to make pornography, that the person showed no resistance or appeared to cooperate actively in the pornographic sessions or events that produced the pornography, that the person signed a contract or made statements affirming a willingness to cooperate in the production of the pornography, that no physical force, threats, or weapons were used in the making of the pornography, or that the person was paid or otherwise compensated. So, if I mean, some of those seem ridiculous and irrelevant, and I honestly think they're in there just to try to make a point to imply that other people would use those arguments. But like, to say, oh, if you signed a contract or like made statements that clearly say that you consented to it and then took money for it, and then there's also no threats or force or violence or weapons, like that would be the heart of a defense. Those would be like your best arguments. And maybe I'm misinterpreting this. Proof of one or more of the following facts or conditions shall not, without more, preclude a finding of coercion. I mean, would you even be able to throw it out using one of those without these things included in there? It just seems very unnecessary. I don't know. I wonder if I could send this to 𝒜𝒹𝒃𝒃 and see if he would go over it and if he can see how much of a disaster this would be. Because that would be he might find that to be an interesting stream. Maybe I'll send him an email and see if this is something he'd be interested in going over. Even though it's not his area of law like at all, but it might be interesting. Let's see. Oh, we have a stat here. For instance, in a random survey of women in San Francisco, 10% of the women interviewed said they had been upset by a husband or a lover who was pressuring them into doing something that they had seen in a pornographic pictures, movies, or books. And then he has like a list of like these different anecdotes, which is like, I mean, I don't know. 10% means 90% of them don't. And this is in a world where he thinks a woman is raped every 2 or 3 minutes or whatever. It seems like it's not the epidemic problem that he needs it to be for his argument to make any sense. This bar of like, oh, a woman had been upset. I'm sorry, we can't make that the standard. Yeah, anyway. Some of what he describes here, it's like some of these anecdotes in here do involve a little bit of coercion, but some of them don't. Some of them are just like I don't know, the boyfriend's just being an asshole. Yeah, as mounting testimony from pornography victims. When he says pornography victims, he doesn't mean people in porn. He means my boyfriend saw something in porn and wanted to do this thing and I didn't like it. That's what he means by pornography victim, just to make that clear. What mounting testimony makes clear is the distinction often made between fantasy and real behavior simply doesn't stand up in the world of pornography. Except it seems like it does. I don't know. Mounting testimony? I think, I'm sorry, we need more than 10% from one random survey, and then, what, like 5, 6 anecdotes you have listed here? It's so thin, and that's so much of what he's putting up here. Okay, yeah, and this is a weird thing, too. Part of this anti-pornography ordinance includes forcing pornography on a person, which I think that means if it's, like, displayed somewhere. How much do you imagine this is actually an issue? If people are just, like, watching porn at work, and that's, like, like, it's just fucking stupid. Assault or physical attack due to pornography. There's actually, later on in here, he has this excerpt from this guy. I want to find that, actually. Yeah, this part here. This is basically... I don't see any statistic or anything that he puts forward that argues that that men just see porn and then they go out and rape. Instead, he has this one anecdote from a man named Chuck. And he was at the age of 20. He divorces his wife a couple of years later. And he says, "Then one night, about a year after I split from my wife, I was out partying and drinking and smoking pot. I'd shot up some heroin and done some downers, and I went to a porno bookstore, put a quarter in the slot, and saw this porn movie. It was just a guy coming up from behind a girl and attacking her and raping her. That's when I started having rape fantasies. When I seen that movie, it was like somebody lit a fuse from my childhood on up. When the fuse got to the porn movie, I exploded. I just went for it. Went out and raped." Like, it's like a cartoon. Like, the idea that this is like a normal experience of like any person. It's like, obviously this guy was really fucked in the head, addicted to all kinds of drugs and just doing heroin, right? And he goes and sees this porn thing and he's like, "Oh, this porn caused me to become all rapey." It's like, clearly, even as he's describing it himself, like this whole stack of dominoes just waiting, right, to see this thing happen. And I guess John Stoltenberg thinks this is like a normal enough excerpt here that that you wouldn't just throw this out as like, this guy is just like a rapist. But anyway, it gets like slightly more ridiculous. It was like a little voice saying, it's all right, go ahead and rape and get your revenge. You'll never get caught. Go out and rip off some girls. It's all right. They even make movies of it." The movie was just like a big picture stand with words on it saying, "Go out and do it. Everybody's doing it, even the movies." Like, can you imagine that mindset? Like this is like apparently what he thinks porn does, is that if something's in a movie, that means it's always good or justified. It's really the Jack Thompson argument. There's violence in the video games, violence in the movies. People are just gonna see that and take it as an endorsement, and it's like, no, not everyone's like you. Then he talks about how he grabbed a woman's breast and then he got scared and ran home and was like upset by what he had tried to do. And then the second time he like stalked a girl at a college and followed her into the bathroom and raped her. It's just, but anyway, that's our anecdote there. I don't know, is that convincing? Does that mean men are just gonna see porn and just and just do it? Okay. Talks about the potential penalties. I mean, the civil rights anti-porn ordinance got completely destroyed and shut down because everybody thought it was a really bad idea. Maybe it is important to look into some of this. Under the coercion provision, a person could sue for money damages from the makers and distributors of the pornography, the product of the coercion, and a person could also sue for a court-ordered injunction to get the pornography into which the person was coerced off the market in the place where the ordinance is law. Under the provision about forcing pornography on someone, a person could sue for money damages from the perpetrator and or the institution under whose authority the forcing occurred, and for a court-ordered injunction to stop any further forcing of the pornography on the plaintiff. Under the assault provision, a person could sue the perpetrator of the assault for money damages. In addition, the assault victim could sue the makers and sellers of the pornography that was used in the assault for money damages and for an injunction against further sale of it where the ordinance is in effect. Similarly, under the trafficking provision, a person could sue for money damages from the makers, sellers, distributors, and exhibitors, and for removal of pornography from sale in the designated city or area. And under the trafficking provision, a person couldn't sue simply on the basis of isolated passages in something, and any injunction could not be enforced without a full court trial. I mean, again, the internet porn almost makes that irrelevant. The idea that they're going to take it off the market. I think in theory you would just have to host the porn somewhere where the ordinance is not in effect, right? Which suggests that maybe trying to make anti-porn laws in this way and tying them to civil rights legislation just isn't going to actually even solve the problems that he's trying to address here. And he complains that people hide behind free speech to buy and sell things that include coercion, force, assault, and trafficking. And this is something I find bizarre, because my understanding is that like those are already crimes. So it seems redundant. I could be mistaken. I find it hard to believe that like you're allowed to rape someone as long as there's a camera. I really don't. I'm pretty positive that's not the world that we live in. Because then every single time someone raped someone, they would just say, "But I recorded it." Like, obviously, it's not that simple. If it's an actual rape that you can prove, then all of this is redundant. Redundant at best. And he argues about having a definition of porn, and some of this is actually good, right? Because we have this problem in obscenity laws where like the definition of things like porn is like really stupid, and they just kind of leave it at that because our society is run by a bunch of boomers and Abrahamics who just like don't want to think about it. Yeah, argues it must be graphic and sexually explicit. And the reason you need both of those things is because you can put sexually explicit things in all kinds of media as long as it's not graphic. It has to be graphically depicted in order for it to be pornographic. But then he has to add in, it must be the subordination of women. And yeah, this is very arbitrary. He claims it's not. He claims this is like a typical definition of subordination. You could argue from a different perspective very easily that porn subordinates men. Because, it depicts them as faceless, it depicts them as disembodied. There's a lot of harm to men in the industry as well. But all of this, of course, is invisible to him. But I think you could actually just make this entire case reversed and just make it all about men. And it would be just as strong. And it must include at least one from a list of specific scenarios listed in the ordinance. So these are the things that have to be included for it to be something they can prosecute under here. Women are presented dehumanized as sexual objects, things, or commodities. Women are presented as sexual objects who enjoy pain or humiliation. Women are presented as sexual objects who experience sexual pleasure in being raped. Women are presented as sexual objects tied up or cut up or mutilated or bruised or physically hurt. Women are presented in postures of sexual submission. Women's body parts, including but not limited to vaginas, breasts, and buttocks, are exhibited such that women are reduced to those parts. This one in particular, if you gender flip it, the argument kind of falls apart. Because it seems that in most porn, that's the way men are used. Men are reduced to their penises. But of course, from Stoltenberg's perspective, that would just be... That would be a power fantasy. That would be an expression of the phallocentric nature of patriarchy. So, you can't win. Women are presented as whores by nature, presented as being penetrated by objects or animals. Women are presented in scenarios of degradation, injury, abasement, torture, shown as filthy or inferior, bleeding, bruised, or hurt in a context that makes these conditions sexual. And then there's an Indianapolis one that has like a shorter list. I don't know. How much more of this we have to go into? I think this is actually the end of it. There's just like a little bit left. Yeah. He makes claims about porn being linked to racism, but I think the only example he gives is an excerpt from some gay porn where there's like some racialized like domination in it. So it's again the same trope of like he just takes anecdotes, extrapolates from the anecdote, and that's it. Maybe this last bit is interesting. Casting the issue this way. Okay, wait, we should go backwards. The particular legal and moral issue being raised about pornography today by radical feminists is about how pornography in particular works, what pornography in particular does, and the particular way that in pornography speech and action are meshed. The issues being raised about pornography by radical feminists are legally and politically original. They are completely different, for instance, from social purity crusades. Let's see. Is it? I don't know. The issue of pornography as raised by radical feminists turns on whether pornographers should be able to hide behind claimed First Amendment rights in order to promote hostility, bigotry, aggression, and assault against individual women and women as a class. So again, if you're actually assaulting people, if it's actually criminal, then we already have laws against that. This argument that you create something and, oh, this promotes hostility or bigotry or aggression or assault, why are we putting that on the medium? Why are we putting that on the thing being produced? You'd focus on people's actual actions. And who is to say that it promotes it or doesn't promote it? Should you go by the intention of the person saying it, or is every single form of speech now beholden to what any individual's like interpretation of it is, right? Promotion it's a very, very low bar, I think. What if you want to show something that depicts this with a value judgment that says it's bad, but then somebody looks at that and they're like, oh, I really like this, I enjoy this, right? Like, there seems to be no limit to this. So he says, casting the issue this way results in social policy questions such as these. How much abuse should the First Amendment shield? To what extent does the First Amendment immunize sexual exploitation? To what extent is the state's ostensible interest in ending sex discrimination compatible with the pornographer's economic incentive to perpetuate it? Does the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection apply to women who are injured in or through pornography? If harm is done in part through speech, if there is, for instance, an injury to an individual in the production of the so-called speech, or if something called speech is used to hurt someone thousands and thousands of times over, does the fact that speech is involved mean that the injury may not be redressed? And again, this could only apply to harms that are non-criminal, otherwise it's redundant. So I don't know. Yeah, and then he lists things that are already limits on free speech, which, I don't know, like, I guess, let's see if we can make an argument. Is the case against, I guess, any porn involving women that could be interpreted in a way that's bad for women or has any negative effect on women whatsoever. Well, we have all that body of everything. The first one is child pornography. Do we even need to get into that? That's harmful by definition. The only nuanced argument there is people who make drawings, right? Because the drawing doesn't technically involve a real life victim. It's still gross or whatever. But that's the only nuance there. Otherwise, it's like obvious why this bullet point is there. Obscenity legally is not even considered speech, even though it exists in words and pictures. Why would obscenity be yeah, no, obscenity is its own thing. All kinds of things exist in words and pictures but don't necessarily count as speech. Like, you're not allowed to use your speech to break a law. That's not the way it works. It's the speech itself is free as long as you're not breaking another law. I don't know. I mean, the obscenity definition is like weird, so there's that. Libel and group libel are still prohibited, even though there is much confusion about how the laws should be applied and interpreted. There's actually an argument that we don't necessarily need laws against libel. That might be a hot take. Fighting words are not protected. Yeah, that's fine, because direct incitement to violence, yeah, same thing. Incitement to violence is not protected. Incitement is actually, like, really hard to prove. Like, it's a very high bar. And blackmail and bribery are crimes done through words that do not have First Amendment protection. So, yeah, again, I guess I'm just kind of going in circles here, because people aren't using porn to justify actual assaults. Like assuming you can prove it's an assault, then it's already illegal. So the kinds of harms that he's comparing to things like blackmail, bribery, and I guess child porn, is like things like regret rape and things like a woman not being able to get a job because of her reputation for being in porn, or because her and her boyfriend tried something they saw in a porn and then didn't like it. Like, I think the comparison seems a little bit ridiculous. And it seems like that was the argument that won the day. So even in a gynocentric culture, they weren't able to get their retarded ordinance passed. The ordinance would definitely hurt the pornography industry. Pornographers could not operate with impunity anymore. They would be hurt economically, they would be at risk legally, and they would be hurt in their social legitimacy, which they very much want. Economically, the ordinance would, as the drafters have suggested, take the profit motive out of rape. The threat of civil liability would be an economic disincentive to actively subordinate women through the production and distribution of materials that do that. Also, through the use of discovery motions in civil trials, information about pornographers' financial dealings and other matters could be obtained. This information could be used, as Dworkin has suggested, to develop prosecutions against organized crime involvement in the industry. That's an interesting argument, right? The problem, of course, is that I think you're just going to force everything underground and then make it even harder to prosecute everything. You're also going to create a higher moral hazard, which means that people who go into porn, they'll have less protection because it's going to be more controlled and more black market and basically higher pay. And less competition in it as well. But then also, like, I mean, I guess that's kind of just the argument. Let's see. And the other thing, too, is you already have an economic incentive to not include actual rape in your porn, because that does put you at risk legally. Because it's already criminal. It's already criminal, right? Like, if you have more permissive laws, then that means that you can have more people being who want to act in porn, who compete with each other. So why would you take the person that you need to rape to do the scene when you can find someone who just wants to do it and you don't have to coerce people? Like, coercion is expensive. I think ultimately this would just drive things underground and it would make things worse. Like, and in addition to good faith pornographers, they would be at risk from getting Me Too'd, basically. So, yeah, I don't know. There might be more to this. There's a lot of particular things, like just with how the whole legal system is set up. So, I don't know. I might be missing something there, but that was just kind of a silly chapter. But I think what it really comes down to is he takes a lot of anecdotes regarding porn, assumes that that's the norm without giving us any evidence. He psychologizes off of that to feed into his social constructivist narrative. He uses this to basically justify. It would basically make porn illegal. Like it really seems like it would just completely shut it all down. And I think that first of all, like you can make the case to people if you want to actually protect people, because that's going to be the easiest way to prevent this, right? Is to tell women, hey, like you should be more clear about your boundaries, and maybe don't do porn. If you are going to get involved in porn, to research the companies involved that two people are saying, so that you go through someone that's reputable, you know, as opposed to just what Linda Lovelace met some dude in a bar and like wanted some money, and like it was like totally sketchy the whole time. And another interesting thing about her is so that woman was involved with Dworkin and Stoltenberg and went to all these conferences and everything, and she actually complained about the feminists. She said that that people like Dworkin and Stoltenberg were making money off of her speeches and off of her speaking to her experiences and everything like that. And she'd be like, well, yeah, I would show up and they'd pay me $500 to do my speech, but like that was it. Like they were totally making a bunch of money and they should have given me more. So I feel like I was exploited all over again. So there was a little bit of infighting there too, where even this woman who's like their poster child for this woman that they want to help and protect or whatever, that woman herself argued that people like Dworkin were actually exploiting her as well. Let's see. Susan nuked my Weeaboo Jones account, so here's my alt, probably, but yeah, that's weird. Huh. Yeah, anyway, that was this section here. So I think a little bit of a shorter one. Let's see, the next one. Activism and moral selfhood. This is one in part 4. It's, I guess, very related to things we'll talk about within the MRM. So it goes kind of more into generalized gender issues. So that'll be a good one to end this on. But anyway, yeah, I didn't have any more thoughts on that. But I think I actually will send this PDF to see if I can get 𝒂𝒶𝒹𝓃 to read through it and see if he finds like any things that are more ridiculous about this, because I feel like there is a lot there if you have like a more a more thorough knowledge of how this ordinance would actually affect things. What do you think of groypers that like Dworkin and Gil Dines due to the fact that they're anti-porn? Yeah, well, I did make the video. What did I call that video? It was a video about porn like a few months ago, and basically I think that you can make arguments that it's not good for people, right? Just like how anything can be addicting. And I think that's the best way to make the case. I think that it's ridiculous that people just want to like ban porn and make it illegal, because you're going to have a bitch of a time trying to define it, and I think that the harms are kind of exaggerated in terms of like the whole social narrative, because it does seem to be the case that we didn't see like some crazy explosion in violence or in sexual violence resulting from porn. So I think it's just like a massive distraction, and it's a bunch of woman worsting, and mostly just like a waste of time. So I think it's very stupid. It also sets a precedent too, because it's based in these social constructivist narratives where, once the government's allowed to say, I have an interest in regulating porn, well, now they have an interest in regulating drugs. They have an interest in regulating literally everything. They have an interest in forcing you to have a specific family structure. They have an interest in forcing you to study a specific thing, have a specific job. They have an interest in forcing you to go live somewhere. There's you can make the same argument based on those harms, and I think if you go after porn and set the standard that the government gets to regulate it to that degree, then it's just a slippery slope. There's going to be absolutely nothing that they're not allowed to justify under that claim, and then we're going to have communism. Yeah, exactly. It's prohibition all over again, and it doesn't ban your alcohol, right? It just makes the mafia rich, absolutely. And I honestly think that if you had something like this anti-porn ordinance, basically it would just lead to like a black market of all of these problems that they're describing being accelerated and made even worse. Whereas if you deregulate things more, you have more people who are able to operate above board, and a lot more options that would not be relying on anything related to like sexual coercion. So ultimately, you have more freedom, and assuming that you hold people to adult standards, you know, then that's that. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this one before I ramble on too long. And yeah, I think I'll have another casual stream later on in the week. I don't know what particular topic to talk about, but as usual, anything that we drop in the library would be things to discuss there. Oh, there is one thing. I missed the emotional intelligence highlight on the last stream, and I found something really funny. So I'm actually going to... Let me go ahead and bring that up here. It was something I saw on Twitter just last night. Let me find that image so I don't have to spoil it. It is... Is it on my desktop? Not that one. I posted it in the Discord. I might just have to grab it there. I don't understand why the screenshots I take get saved into like random different folders all the time, and it makes it like impossible to find anything. Oh, was it this one? No, not that one. That one was funny though. Anyway, it was a post on Twitter where somebody talked about their girlfriend aborting their baby because of its... Maybe it is a troll, I don't know. Let's see. It was, my wife aborted our baby over astrology. Wife got an abortion because the child would be a Sagittarius. I'm upset because we were trying for a child. My wife and I have been married for about 3 years and blah, blah, blah. I'm not reading the whole post, but... That was pretty funny. I mean, it's not funny. Assuming it's true, it's very sad. But that's some white girl emotional intelligence right there. Okay, you think it's definitely a troll? Maybe. I don't know. Do we even know anymore? I guess it could be a Poe. Well, I guess that's the greatest mystery of the universe. We'll hope it's a troll. But I mean, isn't Sagittarius like the worst sign? Like if she was going to abort a baby over the sign, it would be those goddamn Sagittarius.